thing that was interesting, Jim, and we can, talk about this now or a little bit later, is it was curious to me how firms are projecting further expense saves going into 2021, because I think, there's sort of a fear that when you're measuring expenses off of what is already a lower base this year, are we actually, one of my concerns is whether we're actually going to see expense growth next year.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that, as happened in the 2008 Great Recession, if you recall, I think that one of the things that firms did, a lot of firms, frankly, cut too deeply. And so we went through an awkward period of a few months, and then got into a cycle where firms had to increase their spending in order to do things that probably they should have continued doing. And so, to the extent that a lot of the decisions that are being made now are decisions to defer expenses rather than to actually cut them. And we saw a lot of that happening in the Great Recession. Sooner or later, the phone system really does have to be replaced. So you can't just keep putting it off forever. And I think I think you were seeing more caution here from firms in terms of furloughing or laying off lawyers, in part because of the experience they had in the Great Recession. I think firms laid off too many lawyers, particularly mid-level associates, and they were forced later to come back into the market and pay a premium to get them back. And so I think firms are proceeding very cautiously here.
Yes, I would agree with that. I mean, we have been showing clients the analysis of what happened during the last recession, and making that exact point that where you saw headcount reductions, it tended to be more heavily tilted toward associates, only to then come back to bite them just a few years later, when those young associates would have been at the mid-level stage. They weren't available in the same numbers in the market, caused a lot of salary pressure, and perhaps firms do remember that. I mean, Jim, we've been suggesting that perhaps another approach would be to just look at what has happened to the leverage of a firm. And I know you talked about how leverage has grown during this past decade. As it's grown, it's also become more senior and more expensive, and not always more profitable.
Exactly.
And so whereas sort of the default in prior recessions has been, last in, first out, perhaps the bigger opportunity, if firms have to, look at headcount, is to, look at every layer of the leverage model, and perhaps the opportunities would, lie among those more senior, more expensive, less profitable layers of the model.
Right. As you know, that's the hardest thing for law firms to do.
Yes, it is. Those are very, very long-standing relationships, and like I'm sure you see, we go into meetings with firms, and they can, to the letter, almost tell you who the individuals are, and give a very rational reason why they, don't want to let those people go. So it's much easier to look at something on a spreadsheet than it is to make those decisions.